that what I was doing had value. And in the end, I'm sorry, I try not to cry on TV.
Joy Reid breaking down in tears over the cancellation of her MSNBC show, The Readout.
And we're back. All right. We're going to turn now to Iran. We'll be joined by a guest very shortly. First, okay, I'll set it up. All right. Here's the headline from the Associated Press. Breaking: the State Department is preparing to order the departure of all non-essential personnel from the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad due to the potential for regional unrest, two U.S. officials said. And what is that potential regional unrest? Well, there's growing talk of some sort of Israeli or joint U.S.-Israeli strike on Iran. Here's more. The Associated Press also reports that the U.S. has authorized the voluntary departure of the dependents of U.S. troops in the Middle East. And this is on top of preparations to evacuate the U.S. Embassy in Iraq. Not a good sign. Here's an advisory from the British government. The British government has been made aware of increased tensions within the region, which could lead to an escalation of military activity having a direct impact on mariners. Okay. And finally, here is a warning from an Israeli journalist who is close to Benjamin Netanyahu, who he says that Netanyahu is very close to attacking Iran. Now, here he is.
Opinion: Israel is much closer to an attack on Iran on a very short time frame. So the Haredim too. So Aryeh Deri, who knows this, should accept this in his decision-making process. But Israel is close to an attack. The Americans are failing to deliver the goods. The claims that the Iranians are tough travelers and negotiators. They are actually saying that the Americans are not tough travelers and negotiators. What are you actually saying, President Trump? We should also criticize this saga that is failing to bring any results anywhere. And we are constantly being sold some other frameworks. The known time window in Israel is very small for the Iranian issue, and I think we are in that same place.
So that's an Israeli journalist who's close to Netanyahu saying that Israel is close to attacking Iran. So what is going on here? Are we on the brink of another conflict? This time, an assault by Israel, possibly even the U.S., on Iran. It's hard to fathom, but here we are. That's the scenario we all have to face now. To help us make sense of this, let's bring in a very knowledgeable guest on these matters. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. He is a combat veteran, served in Afghanistan, blew the whistle on the U.S. war there and the lies were being told to cover it up. He's now the host of Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us on such short notice in this potentially perilous moment for the world.
Hey, a pleasure to be here. I'm really grateful to have an opportunity.
So what do you make of what you've heard so far? The U.S. pulling personnel out of the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, ordering the removal of dependents of U.S. troops from other regions of the Middle East. Do you see this as a sign that military action is imminent?
It definitely could be. We've certainly seen that before. As I recall from the 2003 Iraq War, when we chose to go fight against Baghdad and all that, I remember that thing, those kinds of things were done in the final period of time, some hours, some a couple of days, etc. And we've seen that in the past when there's going to be some kinetic activity, that all those things you just put up on the screen were indicators that something big was coming, because you're not going to want to take that if you're just saying, well, it's getting more complicated, so we're going to take people out, because there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of logistics. You're talking about flying people out, emergency shutdowns, etc. That's something that you only do when you think that the probability is pretty high for some kind of kinetic action. And I'm just kind of like you. I'm just beside myself. I cannot believe that it actually looks like we're going to do something so counterproductive, so potentially destructive to our interest in the Middle East and really in our national security at large. Because I'm telling you, if you thought the Iraq war was a mistake in 2003, that is nothing compared to what we could get into here. For one of the main reasons, because Iran has the capability to strike back where Saddam Hussein had almost no ability. So let's don't find out. But I really hope that this is just some kind of posturing by President Trump, that he wants to put pressure on Iran. I don't think it's going to work anyway. But the worst thing he could do was to be either cajoled or convinced to go into a military operation, which can only be bad for America.
Well, if you could tell us more about that from a military perspective, I mean, what would be so disastrous about attacking Iran? Because certainly the proponents of it, people inside Washington, the neocons, their allies in Israel, they think it's a really great idea that the U.S. would win pretty easily.
Yeah. These warlusters always tell that story. They always do tell that story, and they are always wrong. It's worked out that way. And all the times they told us how easy things were going to be, or how effective using some military effective force is going to be, etc. And instead, we have catastrophe and 2 decades of failure in Afghanistan, whatever it is, 18 and counting in Iraq so far. And that's worse in some ways than it was before, certainly in terms of the regional dynamics, because instead of having a bulwark against Iran, now then you have common cause between the governments of Iran and Iraq. So well done on that, all the sacrifice we made. But listen, we got to start at the top of this. There is absolutely no legal ground for the president to take on to do this operation. This directly violates the United States Constitution, Article 1, and the 1973 War Powers Act. Full stop, period. No questions about it. Because unless there is pre-existing congressional authorization in the form of either a declaration of war or like an AUMF, like was used in the Iraq war following 9/11, or that we were attacked by Iran, only those conditions allow the president of the United States to unilaterally just send our troops in to attack another country. And what really is troubling, this is not so much a condemnation of Trump as it is a condemnation of our political system right now, that no one's even addressing this. No one's even considered whether he does or doesn't have it. Now then, we have just literally forfeited what was supposed to be a check and balances on our government. And now that we have handed over to the chief executive, whether it's Trump or somebody else in the future, the ability to just, as a monarch, to use the armed forces as he sees fit. And that has really frightening overtones by itself. And if you want, I can get into the military reasons why this is disastrous, but that's a good place to start.
Well, I'd love to hear that. I mean, you have the fact, and Iran has, been very vocal about this, that if there's an attack on Iran, one of the first targets for Iran would be the U.S. military bases all around the region.
Exactly. That is my number one primary concern. There's many, but that's where it starts. And I have been warning for really at least since 2019. And every time I was on television somewhere, I've been saying, get our troops out of Syria, because all they do is serve as strategic vulnerability. They do absolutely nothing for our national security. It doesn't help us in the counterterrorism operation. It's not continuing to destroy ISIS, which we claim all the time. There's no truth to that. But instead, we have the troops all over there. We've already lost 3. Last year, we had 3 killed when one of these Iran-backed militias, in response to what Israel was doing in Gaza and in Lebanon, attacked some of our troops, and 3 of them were killed in a drone strike. But we've got troops all over the area, and Iran correctly has said, if you attack us and go to war with us, we're going to hit these places. And I'll just tell you, from a military perspective, the air defense that many of these locations have is tactical air defense, meaning like Katyusha rockets or drones or something small, mortars maybe. It is not for ballistic missiles. And Iran certainly knows which places have ballistic missile defense and which places don't. And there's nothing that we could do. If they come in and attack some of these, especially smaller outposts, and I've been on some of those and I know what it's like out there, you have no protection at all. And we would be at their mercy. And of course, now you're talking also about the shipping. You're talking about Air Force, because there's lots of reports that after these 2 rounds in 2024, where Iran and Israel went back and forth with American help, we have to point that out, with a lot of these drone attacks, that the last one, Israel went in and took out a lot of air defense. Well, a lot of reports say that Russia has helped them to rebuild that and expand it to S-300, S-400 potentially, meaning that we could send in heavy bombers like in Diego Garcia or some of the Israeli Air Force, and they could get shot down down. I mean, don't think that Iran is like Iraq or Libya in the past, where you can just do whatever you wanted. No one can do anything in response. These guys have some capability, and they could reach out and hurt us directly. And then, of course, you have the issue of the oil infrastructure in the region. I mean, you talk about the Strait of Hormuz at the moment. I'm talking about they could attack American allies in the region and said, hey, you're going to be coming after us, then you're going to have your own oil systems hit here, and we're going to go after your friends in the region. You never know what they can do. There's a large range, and I'm not saying all these things would happen. I'm saying all these things are possible, and we just don't know how desperate the Iranians would be if this happens. A lot of these people you mentioned a minute ago, I call them the war lusters. See, they think that Iran will stay in its package. They think that they know that they can't respond like that or they would be destroyed. So these, surgical strikes, so-called, they wouldn't respond because, then they would be afraid of more coming. Well, that's a damn big gamble, because if they don't do what you think they're going to do, and if they stand up and say, hey, we've got China and Russia over our shoulders this time, and they don't want anything to happen to us for their own reasons, so we're going to get a little bit more plucky in what we're going to do here. That's also possible. All kinds of bad things, Aaron, are possible here.
Here's some breaking news from the Washington Post, which says that the U.S. is on high alert in anticipation of a potential Israeli strike on Iran, with the State Department authorizing the evacuation of some personnel and military family members across the Middle East. What I don't get, Danny, is, could Israel strike Iran without U.S. approval, given just how reliant Israel is on U.S. protection and enforcement of its own aggression across the Middle East? So, if the U.S. is on high alert, could that suggest that there's been some permission given from Washington to Israel? Or do I have that wrong? Could Israel carry this out without the U.S.'s blessing?
I suppose they could attempt it, but I can't even imagine that they would, because the enablers that we bring, whether that's additional air support or air platforms, the ammunition, air defense capabilities, striking enemy air defense facilities, etc. I just don't see how they could do it. And you see, they couldn't do it in 2024 in the 2 rounds where Israel and Iran went back and forth with drones and missile fire. So I don't think that they could do it alone here. And when you're talking about something like this, this is not just, we're going to launch a few missiles here. You would have to have a sustained campaign. It's going to have to be multiple days. And we know in the recent days in open source reporting, we've seen that some of these facilities are miles underground or very, very far into the sides of mountains. And even the best bunker busters we have aren't going to knock out everything. Iran knows that we have these, so of course they're going to have built these facilities to sustain and to survive against this kind of attack. And if you think that you're going to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon by going after these facilities, the most likely outcome is that you're going to push them into it. So that may be the biggest consequence of all, that all of a sudden, once you start doing this, I would imagine that Iran is probably aware of what's capable. They certainly have seen enough to understand what we may do, that they would have had these facilities and all this plutonium that's been pre-processed to 60% already, and they probably have some centrifuges that are very protected that they could ram and spin them up to get it to that 90% pretty short, and that they could probably produce 2 or 3 bombs in a short order. And then all of a sudden one day we look up and like shortly, and there's a big nuclear test that's been going on. That could be the worst possible outcome, which I've been warning against from the beginning, and why we shouldn't attempt this.
Here's what Iran has said. And again, this is a very fluid story, so we're responding to developments in real time as they happen. But this is what Iran recently said. Speaking to Al-Mayadeen, this is what an Iranian source said. Washington's goal is to pressure Iran to make concessions in the nuclear talks and accept the American proposal. There is no real indicator of the region heading toward military escalation between Iran and the U.S. Israel seeks to drag the U.S. into a military confrontation with Iran, but this is unlikely at the current stage. Any Israeli military step against Iranian nuclear facilities will be met with an unprecedented response from Tehran. So what do you make of this? One source in Iran claiming that this is just basically fear-mongering, threat-mongering to try to get Iran to stand down in its stances in the ongoing talks between the U.S. and Iran on a new nuclear deal. There are supposed to be more talks this weekend as part of that process, but now, according to many people knowledgeable that those talks are unlikely to go ahead.
Yeah, I saw that they were postponed. I mean, it's possible that what they're describing is the case, but that would be a whale of a lot of effort. I don't know what they think they're going to accomplish with that. I mean, there's already the threat is on the table. I mean, you go back to March 7th when Trump from the Oval Office said, "Hey, we're in the final stage, folks. We're getting ready to do something here, and we're about out of time. You're going to see something happen soon, and all this." And he said, if Iran doesn't do what I say, there will be bombing and stuff. So they've already had really the maximum diplomatic pressure you can get with signs and all this kind of thing. So I don't see what would be gained from that, because Iran is already saying, look, we're willing to negotiate with you. We'll negotiate on a lot of stuff. But if you're going to ask us to give everything, especially with missiles, long-range missiles, and with no reprocessing, you're going to have a pretty big give in return. But they say, but that's one thing. Trump said his red line, I think through Witkoff a couple of days ago, red line, 0 reprocessing. Can't have any outcome that doesn't include that. Iran has said, that's our red line, that you can't say we can't have any reprocessing. We're not going to do that. So you have two immovable objects. And so what's going to happen here? And I just think that Iran is not going to give in on that one, because that would almost be, man, I think that they would have real problems at home, even within the IRGC, if the leadership basically surrendered without having a shot fired. I just don't think that they would do that. So I don't see what this would benefit, basically big time saber rattling. So I hope it is, though, because that's a whole lot better than actually getting ready for military action. But I'm skeptical, I'll say.
Danny Davis, you are a combat veteran. You were vindicated in your warnings about the progress of the Afghanistan war and the lies that the public was being told about it. And you were recently considered for a very senior position in the U.S. government to be a deputy to Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, who currently is under fire from critics because she's warning about the dangers of nuclear war because of the proxy war in Ukraine. Now, you were up for this position, but there was a heavy backlash from warmongering forces. Do you think that it was your stance on Iran, including your, opposition to military strikes, that helped sink your potential candidacy for this job?
Without question, that was a big part of it. Probably a bigger part was that I said on numerous times on my own show and on the Fox News and every other place I went on, that the policies of the secular government in Israel, of Benjamin Netanyahu, was sending Israel down a path using military power to achieve a political outcome, peace and security for Israel, that will fail. It cannot succeed. It will harm the Israeli people. It won't bring them peace. It will bring more chaos and sow seeds of future disorder and violence in the region. And obviously it'll do terrible things to the Palestinian people. And they don't want to hear that. So they went against me. And I mean, it was in print all over the place. Mark Levin was certainly against me, Laura Loomer, a bunch of others. I regret that, just because it's sad that people who advocate for another power have basically veto power over who gets into the highest levels of the U.S. government. And believe me, the last thing we need right now is to have a cabinet that's only surrounded by people that will say, yes, let's do whatever Benjamin Netanyahu wants, or any other country for that matter. I am absolutely America first and looking out for the interest of our country. And I regret that happened, but I wasn't in the least surprised about it. I was actually surprised that he got my candidacy got as far as it did.
All right, Danny Davis, I know your time is tight. I'm so grateful to you for joining, especially on such short notice. Any final comments for us as we all now grapple with the potential of military action against Iran?
Yeah, the bottom line is that there does not need to be any war. There is absolutely nothing, and this cannot be more strongly stated. There is nothing at stake for American national security interest that would necessitate even the contemplation of using lethal military power against Iran. Absolutely nothing. Everything is negative if we go down that path, and I weep for the death of the balance of power between our branches of government and the lack of respect for the Constitution anymore, because I think that's a dark road for us to go down.
Daniel Davis, combat veteran, host of Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, we'll go to a break and be right back.
All right. Hey, everyone, we're going to go to Rumble. So the link is in the YouTube chat. Let me make sure I got everybody's chats over there. Yes. Link is in the YouTube chat, and we'll see you over at Rumble in just a couple minutes.